segment of the show for today. The topic is the Great Debate, and we're talking to Dr. Al-Hadid. And of course, Dr. Al-Hadid, what we'd like to do during this final segment is to deal with the Great Debate, but to look at it from perhaps a different perspective, as you indicated earlier, to indicate that one of the real issues dealing with the Great Debate is self-identification.
Yes, sir.
And I think one of the things that everybody is aware of is that African Americans have been self-identified for the longest. So let's talk about how we move from one name to the other name as part of that Great Debate.
Yes. Well, we have to start back in Africa. And when we were in Africa, we had many identities. In a certain way, the idea of being an African is something quite new. When we were in Africa, we were a specific ethnic group. If we were in certain parts of West Africa, say for example in the Mali Empire, we were Mandinkas or Woloffs. If we were in the northern part of Nigeria, in Hausa-land, we were Hausas or Fulanis. So when we were there, we had a very distinct ethnic identity, which included beliefs, dietary practices, initiation rites, markings, a language, distinct religion. So now when we came over here during the period of slavery, one of the tactics that was used by the enslavers was to completely, as much as possible, erase the language, the religion, the names, and any real references back to Africa. But there were things that could not be erased. One is you couldn't erase the history. We are historical African people. You could not erase the genetic pool, because if you look at African Americans and you look around the world for people that look like African American, you would not find them in Europe or in China, you know. You would find them in the heart of Africa. So Africa is our standard or our cultural reference point. Now, once we got over here, because of the intense strategy of erasing the identity to create a better way to control the plantation, we went through a number of name changes. First, we went from being Mandinkas or Woloffs to just simply being chattel of property. So initially you had chattel slaves. And then we came from the river Niger, so the N-word was introduced early, because the N-word, when you trace the etymology of it, if you said Niger, N-I-G-E-R, and you put another G in there, that becomes the N-word. But initially, that N-word actually referred back to the river Niger, where many of our people came from. And then many of us came from the Guinea coast, so sometimes they might call it Guineas, okay, or Geechees, like we have in South Carolina. And over time, we became colored. There's a novel I called entitled Once Upon a Time When We Were Colored. So we were the colored man. And then we became Negroes. Initially, Negro with a small n, and then we tried to dignify that word Negro, and we insisted it be written with a capital N. And in the 1960s, when Elijah Muhammad started talking about the Asiatic black man, but even before Elijah Muhammad, you had Noble Drew Ali in the 1920s, who identified us as Moors or Moabites. And then, of course, when Farad came along, he identified us as Asiatics. So we were Moabites, Moors, Asiatics, and eventually we settled on being black. Then we got back in the same problem we had with Negro. Are you going to spell black with a capital B or a small, a lowercase b? So we insisted that black should be spelled with a capital B. And from black, we went to being African Americans or Afro Americans. Initially it was Afro American. And so, well, you know, Afro is a hyphen, so let's give it more nationality. We went from Afro American to African American. So we used to say in the 60s, every colored person is a potential Negro. And every Negro is a potential colored person. Every colored person is a potential black person. Every black person is a potential Afro-American. Every Afro-American is a potential African-American. And every African-American is a potential African. So I think we just come full circle, and where we are now is debating whether we are Africans or Americans, but that's not really a serious debate because we are Americans. Why? Because we were born here. We have a Social Security card, we have a birth certificate. So by citizenship, we are Americans, and that's what the Civil Rights Movement was all about. But identifying your citizenship in a democracy that is multi-ethnic still doesn't tell you everything that you need to know. It gives you certain rights and it gives you certain privileges, but it does not give you your birth rights. It gives you your citizenship or civil rights, but it doesn't give you your birth rights. And I think the issue with us now is birth rights. I mean, we've already fought for civil rights. Now we need birth rights. And by fighting for birth rights, we come to fight for human rights. And as we fight for human rights, of course, we need to raise the question of reparations. So I think that each stage in our consciousness development or each stage in our struggle tends to be marked by a name change. The deeper we understand our situation in the world, the more we tend to, change our name. So when we were assimilationists and integrationists, we were coloreds and Negroes. And then once we started looking at nationalism, then we became Afro-Americans and African-Americans. And now that we're trying to look at our problem in America in an international context, we're now seriously considering identifying ourselves as Africans, as an ethnic group or as a nationality, and then only seeing being an American as a citizenship, and it has nothing to do with your identity. Because once you get encumbered or entangled in this debate about race, it's an absurd conversation because there's only one race. That's the human race. Human beings differ by their languages, the color, their physical features, the texture of their hair, their belief systems, and their culture. They don't differ biologically as such. I mean, biologically, we are the same as any other human being. And so by getting involved in this debate about race and racism, it presupposes that one group is human and another group is subhuman. So the race and racism comes out of the fact that when we became chattel slaves, we were subjugated to the level of animals. So a slave had no rights, civil or human, and a slave was on the same level as farm animals, a horse, cow, or chicken. And of course, when we had the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, those gave us freedom, gave us the rights of citizenship and the right to vote. So then people start talking about, are you human? And if you are human, what's the standard? So if we're human, the standard is being like Europeans or being like whites. And now we're saying, well, those standards are not applicable to us. Our standards of humanity should be based on our own culture. So now we're starting to see ourselves from the inside rather than using a definition that, in quotes, is supposed to be a universal, but it's not really universal. It's applicable only to people of European descent. And then when you deal with people of European descent, they break down into certain ethnic groups, which used to be tribal groups. People, when they say the Anglo-Saxon was a tribe, or Germans, the Germans come out of the Teutonic tribe, and so forth. So I think once we have that debate about names, nationality, citizenship, and ethnicity, that's how you get those various designations to mark off those historical periods.
You know, Dr. AAl-Hadid, over the last minute and a half that we have here, I want to thank you for coming by and giving us that sociological as well as historical view in terms of self-identification among African Americans. But during this last minute and 10 or 15 seconds that we have, perhaps you might have some parting statements or some parting comments that you'd like to make in reference to this whole issue of the great debate.
Yes, I think at this point, as you know, our issue for this evening, we're having a great debate in connection with the 9th Annual Africana Studies Conference and the 20th Annual Ancient Kemetic Studies Conference. Our issues just want to be that blacks in America are African, cultural myth or social reality, and it will be debated from the standpoint of Malcolm, Martin, and a synthesis. And it seems as though that we are beginning to realize that culturally we are Africans, just as we are Africans historically and genetically. Because if you take a zebra out of Africa, it doesn't become a orangutan. If you take an elephant out of Africa, it becomes an African. We are the only thing that comes out of Africa that mutates once it comes over here. You know, you can go to the Serengeti Plains in East Africa, bring over a lion, put it in Grasmere Park, and it's still going to be a lion. But you bring us from East or West Africa, and we become colored, Negroes, and so forth.
Very good. Of course, Dr. Al-Hadid, we're out of time. Let me thank you for coming by and bringing us that excellent information. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.